I'm Sophie Coe, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, we'll discuss the latest updates from across the front lines, hear from our reporter on the ground in Ukraine, and find out how satellites are helping Ukraine beat the Russians.
This hideous and barbaric venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
Every weekday afternoon, we sit down with leading journalists from the Telegraph's London newsroom and our teams reporting on the ground to bring you the latest news and analysis on the war in Ukraine. It's Wednesday, the 8th of June, day 105. And today, I'm joined by Dom Nicholls, the Telegraph's Defence and Security Editor, our foreign correspondent, Nicola Smith, in Kyiv, and our US correspondent, Jamie Johnson. I started by asking Nicola what life in Kyiv is like 105 days into the war.
So I'm currently in central Kyiv. It's actually a beautiful, sunny, early summer day. And the city's really coming back to life. This is my first time in Ukraine, so I've just been here for a week, but I was actually quite surprised driving into Kyiv just to see how vibrant the city is just now. Cafes, bars, restaurants, offices are all open. There are a lot of people in the streets. They're out with their families, and life seems pretty normal here. Obviously, when you're driving into the city, there's some very jarring sights on the way in. There's still a lot of destroyed buildings, warehouses, homes, and you do have air raid sirens going off on an almost daily basis. The first day I was here, there were 3 overnight, and one of them did in fact signal a missile strike on Kyiv, which was the first since the end of April. So people are very resilient and kind of trying to carry on as normal, but the risks are obviously still there, huge risks, and some politicians are also concerned that Russia might be starting to plan a second assault on Kyiv. So people are just kind of trying to survive and trying to live life as normally as possible just now.
And after the recent strike on Kyiv, I know Kyiv hadn't seen a strike for a little while, and then at the weekend we saw this heightened tension once again. Does it feel like life has kind of locked down since then at all, or is there a sense that people are just trying to live their lives as normally as possible?
I haven't detected any sign of people locking down. I mean, the government has been quite clear that air raid sirens should be taken seriously and that people should take shelter. But when I came to my hotel, I asked, is there a shelter here? And they said, well, yes, we have a basement. Here it is. And they said, but no one really uses it anymore. And I certainly get that impression from the population that they are just used to living with these dangers. And after the missile strike, we actually spoke to a woman who lives just about 2 kilometers from where one of the missiles hit. The Russians appear to have been targeting some infrastructure, railway infrastructure and possibly warehouse. And she said that she heard the air raid sirens. She kind of went back to sleep because it was 5 a.m. And then shortly afterwards, she heard 5 loud booms. And she said she just put the blanket back over her head, and she said to us, we're not the same people that we were before February. And I really sense that kind of resilience among the population, that people are really learning to live with dangers that they shouldn't have to live with, but they're just trying to get on with their lives and trying to get, kind of trying to go around their daily business. And Kyiv, thankfully, at the moment is relatively, it is peaceful just now, and we certainly hope that it stays that way. But yesterday we went to the outskirts of Kyiv. We went to Irpin, the commuter town that was really badly hit by the Russian forces in the early days of the war, and it's really hard to describe how shocking the sight is of regular homes that have just been completely destroyed, and burnt out shells, and it's just kind of regular residential areas. It's actually quite a kind of middle class affluent town, And people's homes have just been completely taken away from them. Lives as well. We spoke to one man yesterday who was living in a tent. His family are in a different part of the country, and he said, well, my home's destroyed. I don't know how we're going to rebuild, he said, but at least we're alive, at least we're healthy. And so people are very strong. They're, mentally strong, physically strong, and they're really just trying to carry on.
And I know that recently you wrote a report that was in the paper the other day all about a rehab centre that you visited, which I think sits with that idea of people striving to find solutions against adversity and just carry on. Can you tell us a bit more about the centre that you visited?
Sure. So the centre was in Lviv, which is in the west of the country. And Lviv has been spared a lot of the destruction that's been seen on the outskirts of Kyiv or in the rest of the country. But it does have a heavy responsibility in terms of absorbing traumatized citizens who've fled their homes and trying to, kind of rehouse them, help them to find a job, help them to settle. And a big part of that has been rehabilitation. Many thousands of people have lost limbs, tragically, through battles, civilians and soldiers. Nobody really knows the full scale of the problem yet. The mayor of Lviv estimates it could be around 50,000 people who've lost limbs who will need new prosthetics. And so one of the things that he is really striving to do in Lviv is to build one of the world's largest rehabilitation centres. And so we went to an existing state-run rehabilitation centre that has a few hundred people there. And we saw what they're trying to do. We spoke to a psychologist who the whole process of how they help people to rebuild their lives. And it's a very long process. And we're only starting to see part of the scale of the problem now, because when you lose a limb, then it takes several months. It takes about 3 months before you can even start to think about finding some kind of prosthetic. So we're starting to see people come now looking for them. There's going to be a huge shortage of limbs themselves, but also of experts who can help people go through the fitting process and the rehabilitation process and learning how to use the prosthetics. And so we spoke to one young man who's a soldier, and he lost the lower part of his right leg in March. He was basically with his battalion, and they were told that they had to fire on Russian tanks that were attacking a village in the east. And they were climbing over a fence to find a better position, and he found himself on top of the fence just staring straight at a tank, which then fired on him. And he said his leg blew straight off. And this kind of story is tragically very common here. And so he was just coming to terms with what that meant for him. He was at this rehabilitation centre with his wife and his 2-year-old son. So the centre tries to bring families when they can, because it really helps with the healing process. And so he was grateful for that. But you could just see the frustration in his eyes as well. We saw him just after his first consultation, and he was just trying to absorb the fact that he might not have a high quality prosthetic for the first year before he could move on to something more sophisticated. And he was just saying, but I can't wait a year. I just want to get back to, chasing my toddler son around. And I want to get back to work. I want to, join the police. And so you can see it's going to be psychologically and physically, it's going to be a really long road for a lot of people, and a huge cost to pay for individuals, from Putin's war. It's going to basically change lives forever.
Definitely. I also wanted to ask you, I know you've been reporting on the situation for foreign fighters, and you've been speaking to both those within Ukraine and those outside of Ukraine who have been coming to fight. Can you tell us about the people that you met there?
Sure. So I met one British guy, Matthew Robinson. He is currently with the Georgian Legion. And he is one of dozens of trainers, foreign trainers, who are trying to help local defence forces, the territorial defence forces. They're trying to train people up in basic battle tactics and how to use weapons. There's such a need on the front lines just now. President Zelensky recently said that they could be losing up to 100 soldiers a day. And so on the front lines, you've got a combination of the conventional forces and also the territorial defence forces who have less experience. So one of Matthew is one of several trainers who is basically just trying to train people as quickly as possible. And it's not an ideal situation. A lot of people are going to the front lines with very little training at all, but you just have to do what you can do when there's such an unexpected and invasion on this scale. And so he said he initially came to Ukraine because he wanted to fight on the front lines. He described a kind of chaotic scene in the early weeks of the war, which you would imagine, nobody expected an invasion like this. So he said he had experience in Iraq and also with the US military in Germany, and he wanted to put his skills to good use. He expressed some frustration that the lack of equipment for foreign fighters and also for local fighters, there are still shortfalls in things like protective gear, flak jackets, helmets, and sometimes ammunition. It seems that the front lines are now better supplied, but there are some units who are still lacking basics. So he's trying to procure that. He's trying to get donations from abroad, and he's also trying to kind of use his skill set to train local people. So he said that he was working mainly with Americans, ex-military. He said there were about 40 foreign trainers, but there's also another group called the International Legion of Territorial Defence. And so we're just talking to them this week as well, just to kind of try and get a sense of how many fighters they have in their ranks. And there are certainly anecdotes of foreign fighters being on the front lines supporting the territorial defence forces. There was a report last week that 3 had actually been killed, including an Australian and the Frenchman. So they're definitely here, but it does sound like in the early days of the war that because it was a confusing and chaotic situation that some did leave as well and kind of went back home.
Thanks, Nikki. Now, on the subject of these foreign fighters coming from across the globe, 2 British men, Aidan Ashling and Sean Pinner, have found themselves, they came over to Ukraine to fight. They're now imprisoned in a Russian jail. And I know that there's been developments in their situation today. Dom Nicholls, can you give us an update on the situation for Aidan and Sean?
Sure. Hi, Sophie. Thanks for that. And hi, everybody. So Aidan Ashling, 28-year-old British guy, Sean Pinner, 48. They've been fighting. They were in the Azovstal plant down in Mariupol and had to surrender eventually as many of the Ukrainian, or they're with the Marine force down there, the Ukrainian Marines. They are now being tried by Russia along with a Moroccan guy charged with being mercenaries. Now, they dispute this. They say they've had long-standing ties to the country and they've been in the military for a number of years. They haven't just gone over in the last few weeks. But it's brought into sharp focus this whole issue of foreign fighters and what happens to them. Now, we've got to make a distinction here. This is different from the trials, the 3 convictions in Ukrainian courts for war crimes under Ukrainian legislation. Remember that chap, the tank commander who shot the Ukrainian man on the bicycle, who was using his mobile phone, and the guy that shot him said that we thought he had been passing information on their movements. So that was murder. He was tried and convicted of murder and given a life sentence. So those kind of war crimes are different from what's happening here with these Brits, Ashling and Pinner. And the big concern here is that Russia said that the charges that's been levied against them can carry the death sentence. Now, there's a whole different legal distinctions between whether you're a fighter or you're a civilian, whether you're a combatant, whether you're ordered combat, i.e. if you've been injured, and even though you are a uniformed combatant, you are not taking any part in hostilities and not able to offer a threat to the enemy. And all of those are distinct from whether or not you're a mercenary, you are paid to fight. Different jurisdictions have different legal definitions of what it is to be a mercenary. Some would view that. We've got to be careful about the term mercenary as well, because the Foreign Legion in the Ukrainian army are foreign nationals who have, I don't know if they swear an oath to Ukraine, but they have to sign a contract for, I think it's a couple of years, but they are then constituted parts of the Ukrainian military. So they wear a uniform. You have to wear an identifiable badge. I think the Geneva Conventions say this is the little flag that most people wear on their left shoulder. You don't want it so big that it sticks out as a target, but you do have to wear a badge that can be identifiable and show that you are you belong to a national force. This is in the original invasion of Ukraine in 2014. You remember the little green men, which we all very, very strongly suspected were Russian soldiers just without their badges on. So under the UN conventions, you've got to be identifiable as to belong to a force, and that is what the Foreign Legion of the Ukrainian army are. So they would dispute. They would say, well, they are not mercenaries. Different, for example, in the Russian forces with the Wagner Group, who is a private military company and probably come under the definition of mercenary. So these two Brits, Aslin and Pinner, are being tried as mercenaries under Russian law. They are they're still in the Donbass. They're in the Russian separatist-held areas of Ukraine. So they're not in Russia proper yet. But as I say, it does carry under their legal procedure the death sentence. And it would be very interesting to see what's going to happen here. I mean, I would think it'd be extraordinary if the death sentence was actually carried out. But then I think it's extraordinary, this whole thing anyway. However, if they're given an extended jail sentence, for example, then that's treating them as a civilian. And the Ukrainians would say, well, no, they are combatants. They are legal combatants. So, right, they surrendered. You've got them. They need to go to a prison of war camp, which needs to be administered by the International Committee of the Red Cross, or not administered by, but have access. The International Committee of the Red Cross has to have access to those prisoners of war camp. They are accorded certain rights and privileges as prisoners of war, and they are recognised as combatants who are prisoners of war, not civilians that took up arms. Although, even in that situation, if you are a civilian and you've clearly taken up arms against an aggressor, for the period that you have taken up arms, you are a combatant. So there's a whole load of legal stuff here, but these guys shouldn't be subject to any civilian law. They are soldiers, and they should be treated as prisoners of war. Now, I would have thought Russia are going to try and use this as an example, so I would expect them, maybe they will get the death sentence and it'll be commuted to life or something like this, which just in itself would be outrageous. But I wouldn't be surprised if Russia used this as an example to try and weaken the draw from the international community to go and join the Ukrainian Foreign Legion. Excuse me. So if these guys are treated as civilians and tried in a civil court and given a sanction, a jail term, then I would have thought Russia would use that to try and dissuade other people from joining. So it's one to watch. It's a very, in many ways, very complicated case, which we'll get some legal expertise, I think, and we'll really dig into this, because I don't think this is going to be the only example of this type of case we see. But that trial, such as it is going on now, and we will watch it with keen interest.
Thanks, Dom. And I wanted to zoom out slightly now onto a more diplomatic question beyond these kind of individual personal stories that we've heard from both you and Nikki. So today, Germany's Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, appeared to claim that he was doing more to support Ukraine than Britain was, because he suggested that only the US had sent more military aid to Kyiv. Now, I know yesterday on yesterday's podcast, which our listeners can listen back to on their podcast apps, you were relatively critical of Germany's response to Ukraine. How do you respond to Scholz's statement? And also, could you give us an update on the other diplomatic puzzle pieces that have been putting into place over the last 24 hours?
Yeah, so firstly, on Germany, I'm not going to get into a sort of locked horns match about what counts as aid, if it's lethal aid or humanitarian aid or economic and financial aid and what have you. But I would just suggest that people look at the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. This is a think tank based in Germany, as the name suggests, that is seen as the go-to place for this, and they are saying that that actually, Germany is not sending as much military aid as the US, as Poland, as the UK. However, the Kiel Institute does say Germany is sending more than France and Canada and others. But I'd invite people to go and have a look at the think tank and make your own mind up if you don't want to sort of take my opinion for it. But the Kiel Institute, we report that widely. They're a well-regarded think tank, internationally regarded think tank. We're not the only media outlet to refer to them and use their statistics, but they say they got it in black and white. I made absolutely sure before I came on today. Just when I had another look at the think tank, and yeah, they're saying that UK is sending more aid than Germany. I mean, we've got to be careful here. We don't want to get into a sort of tit for tat, because if it's a little bit more or a little bit less of not very much, that's not great any side of the fence you're on. If it's a little bit more or a little bit less of loads of stuff, then that's quite a nice problem to have. Now, I don't, as you remember from yesterday, I was warmly critical of our colleagues and allies in Germany about what's being sent when and how much and what's promised and so on. So I think we're not quite arguing about how much. How much stuff has been sent, saying there's been loads, and we're just wrangling about who's on top. I think Germany can do more here, should do more. I think Scholz knows that. I mean, but for him to even make those comments, it suggests that he's feeling a little bit bruised on this, and they can very easily turn this around by being overt about what they're supplying. The point I made yesterday was that Germany apparently is supplying 100 Marder infantry fighting vehicles from their old stocks, because they're upgrading their Marder infantry vehicles to another vehicle, Puma, I think. And they are sending 100 Marder to Greece, for Greece to send 100. I don't know the quantity, but for Greece to send BMP-1, Russian-made or Soviet-made, Soviet vintage-made infantry fighting vehicles, pretty old stock. Not brilliant. Russia haven't fared well with them in the war so far. So I was suggesting yesterday, actually, it would just be better for Germany to send the Marders rather than do this convoluted deal. So I think Germany is I think it's fair criticism of Germany at the moment. I think Scholz's statement is, I don't know what he was looking at to suggest that. I mean, they've probably got their own. It's not unheard of for governments to rely on their own research, and turns out that they're doing a great job and number one of the heap. But yeah, I would just invite people to go and have a look at the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. That's the think tank we use. That's the think tank that many other people use, internationally well regarded, and all the figures are there. Briefly elsewhere, so we were talking grain yesterday, and the continued difficulties getting anything out of Ukraine in anything like the numbers, the quantities that should be to keep the whole world economy in terms of grain exports and aid for this in this regard going. Now, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, is in Turkey today with his opposite number, and he was saying, here's a quote: "We are ready to ensure the safety of ships that leave Ukraine's ports. We're ready to do this in cooperation with our Turkish colleagues." That's the end of the quote. He was saying the onus was on Ukraine to demine the ports in order to resume the grain shipments, and said there's no action required by Russia as it had already made all the necessary commitments. So, classic diversion from Russia. I mean, them saying, look, it's not us. There's nothing we can do. We've done as much as we can. Who else could be expected to do more? I mean, crikey, if it wasn't for only those pesky Ukrainians that didn't want to sell their grain to the world and ship it out to the most poverty-stricken parts of the planet, we'd be in clover. So, I don't believe a word of this. Unhelpfully, his opposite number, the foreign minister for Turkey, here's another quote: "If we need to open up the international market to Ukrainian grain, we see the removal of obstacles standing in the way of Russia's exports as a legitimate demand. I don't think that's a very helpful comment from Turkey. Firstly, because to say it's a legitimate demand, it is a legitimate demand to get the grain out, but it doesn't legitimise Russia's actions. And secondly, the use of the words there, standing in the way of Russia's exports. It's not Russia's exports. Most of it's Ukraine's. They've just nicked it. So they're reframing it in this way is not helpful at all. And of course, what is Russia going to demand to get this grain out? It's lessening of sanctions, or that's the most obvious. But there could be something else. But it would be lessening of sanctions at least, and then maybe some more. So Lavrov saying, we're perfectly ready to ensure the safety of ships. It's like there's some external Independence Day alien invasion creating this threat to the ships. I mean, ensuring the safety of the ships, you can ensure that, mate, by not shooting at them when they try and come out of the ports. So I think this is classic Russian diversionary tactics. It's not helpful. We would otherwise be able to write it off as a bit more Lavrovisms if it hadn't been for the, I think, fairly unhelpful comments from Turkey there, talking about legitimate demands and Russia's exports. So the debate rumbles on. At least it is now a daily talk piece about grain and supplies and international aid. So that's the one positive we should take from it. We now need to see a very robust response from the UN. You may remember yesterday when the EU Commissioner Charles Michel took Russia's ambassador to task about saying that he was using grain, or Russia was using grain as a stealth weapon, and Russia's ambassador stormed out of the Security Council saying it was all lies. So it is coming to a head. It is now a daily talk piece, which is good. I don't think these comments are helpful from Turkey, and I think Lavrov's comments can just be written off as the kind of stuff we would expect.
Thanks, Dom. And Nikki, I was interested to hear from you, just to go back to Dom's thought at the beginning about the Scholz's comments and whether or how much Germany was helping Ukraine. On the ground, have you seen a difference between how Ukrainians think of the UK and how they think of Germany or even France?
Yes, absolutely. There's a vast gulf between what they think of the UK and Germany. And without going into the details of who's been donating what or offering what support, ordinary Ukrainians, in terms of their perception of the UK and Germany, the UK has certainly won hearts and minds with its military and political support in Ukraine. Ukrainians are constantly saying how grateful they are to the UK and how much they admire and respect Boris Johnson and his strong stance on Ukraine. You certainly don't hear the same about Germany or Scholz. By comparison, people are kind of very scathing towards the German response. I'm working with a young local translator who keeps showing me internet memes and jokes that are going around in WhatsApp groups about Germany's response. For example, he showed me one with a snail with a bullet on its back heading towards the front lines. There was a comparison of German support with giving out ice cream cones. So people are really quite disappointed. The general public, the people we've spoken to, say how disappointed they are with Germany's response. And by contrast, they love Boris Johnson. Yesterday, we did a kind of small, fun story about a cafe in the centre of Kyiv that had created a Boris Johnson croissant. Because they said they wanted to show their gratitude towards the British Prime Minister for his support. And by the time we got to the cafe, it had sold out. So I think that certainly Germany is not being viewed very favourably by the Ukrainian public in general, but the UK is.
Thanks so much, Nikki. And I should say that if our listeners want to see the photo of the Boris Johnson croissant, it's on the Telegraph's website. You just need to go to the World section because it is surprisingly akin to the British Prime Minister. Now, I think we should move on to speak to Jamie Johnson, who is our US correspondent. Now, Jamie went to the headquarters of Maxar Technologies, which he will tell you a lot more about, but it is a company that is helping the Ukrainians to beat the Russians in a number of ways, and all I know about Maxar is that I often see the name in the corner of very important photographs. So, Jamie, I wondered if you could start by telling us what exactly Maxar do.
Hi there. No, absolutely. It's brilliant. These stories are always some of the best to report on because you go somewhere completely different and you just sit there for hours and you just learn so much. So I went to this Maxar Technologies, which, as you say, we've seen it pop up in the corner, the watermark of all the satellite photos from Ukraine. But they've got loads of clients. Their technology is actually the underlying technology for Google Maps, for instance. So they've got 4 satellites at the moment. They're building 6 more are going to come on stream later this year. They circle the globe. I think it's at 10,000 miles an hour. So about every 94 minutes, they circle the Earth. And they are capturing 7.5 mile swathes of land at a time. And so 10 years ago, this would have taken a day, maybe 2 days to get the imaging, to work out what's happening, to find exactly the right areas to look at. It may be that the defense organizations are saying, can you look here? It may be that they themselves are flagging it to their clients. But now they can do this in a matter of hours. So military generals in Ukraine are seeing images, looking at where the Russian battalions are, looking at where they're moving their artillery across fields, looking at where the tanks are lining up in the forests. And they can move accordingly and they can work out where their resupply lines. And it's just another tool in the armory that's absolutely fascinating in this conflict.
And what kind of incidents have they managed to capture so far in Ukraine?
So there's 2 things. One is sort of preemptive and one is retrospective. And I think the retrospective stuff comes into when we look at war crimes tribunals. So the examples of that would be the bodies on the streets in Bucha would be the obvious ones. We obviously saw the pictures on the ground taken by photographers and people who were there. I know Danielle Sheridan went there. But the Russians tried to claim, hang on a second, we were gone by the time this had happened. This wasn't us. This must have been other people. Satellite imagery clearly shows the Russians were in the area. And the satellite images is good enough to show those bodies were on the ground when they were there, which is terrible. But it's necessary to hold Russia accountable for these crimes. So that's a retrospective part. Then you've got the preemptive part. And the first time I think we really saw these images was when the sort of infamous 40-mile long resupply convoy. And I spoke to the CEO and I spoke to their sort of head of news at Maxar, and they said this was really one of the turning points in the war. Being able to zoom out and show this picture, being able to show exactly what's going on, really gave the world a sort of wake-up call, being, hang on a second, this is not just artillery, this is not just the movement of troops around the fringes. They are trying to penetrate the heart of this country. They are trying to move an enormous convoy to Kyiv. And I think from then everyone has sort of taken a real notice of these pictures.
And what kind of incidents have they managed to capture so far in Ukraine?
Yes, so they've started working a lot more with Ukrainians. They've got a long-standing relationship with the Five Eyes countries. So obviously the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the US. And they do a lot of work with the US government anyway. But they've opened up a lot of their sort of technology to Ukraine. It's a sort of a relationship which goes both ways. Sometimes it'll be the Maxar staff having a look, particularly at places like Severodonetsk or wherever, and saying, "Hang on a second, look, we are noticing there's the movement of troops, there's the movement of artillery, this place is being shelled." They're obviously trying to soften it up before sending troops through on the ground, or the Ukrainians or the UK or the US will have their own intelligence, which they've got from other sources, and say, hang on a second, we're seeing chatter on Telegram or we're seeing talks elsewhere saying there could be a movement over here. And then you point the satellites in the right direction. So it goes both ways. And that's sort of the good relationship that they have.
Jamie, can I ask a question, please? Firstly, it's great to hear you, mate. The Riviera kid is back in town. Great to hear. When you visited Maxar, so this company, as I understand it, they came from the insurance business. Is that right? So they're using the satellite imagery to look at how far the wildfire spread or how far the flood spread and which homes and businesses should be compensated and that kind of thing. I think that's where they came from. Please correct me if I'm wrong, as I probably am. But the point I'm making is that they weren't set up as a military supporting company from the get-go. And I just wonder if that had come through in any of the morals and ethics of the people working there? Had anyone working there that now see what their product is being used for, were any of them a bit uncomfortable with that, or were they overtly supportive of it? Did they not care that there's a military application? And the flip side of that is the security. How tight is the security? Because if this stuff is likely to be used in the future in any war crimes tribunals, as I think it probably will be, I don't think the national governments will give up their super secret imagery. So this stuff is good enough to be presented to court. So if there's a security angle there now, how hot are they on security and making sure their employees are safe and making sure that people aren't trying to infiltrate these companies to discredit them for any future legal proceedings?
No, of course. So they have actually been working with military for quite a long time. They've got clients, including people like Google, but they have been working with the US, and they've actually just signed a $3.2 billion 10-year deal with the US government. But going back, you're right in the sense that some of their best work that I've seen involved, for instance, illegal fishing out in China, using Chinese ships. So they were able to say, it was seafood for slavery or slavery for seafood. It was a thing they did with the Associated Press. So they're not just about the military. That's absolutely correct. But I think they found a real purpose here. The impression I got from all of them is that they realized they were doing something that was genuinely making a difference. They abhor the invasion by Russia, and they want to be able to help and facilitate. Now, they were quite difficult to pin down on exactly what they were doing, because obviously it's sort of confidential client relationships. So they're not able to say, oh yes, we've passed this information on this morning. But they use these brilliant examples of how this can be a tool. So going back to Afghanistan, for instance, when the withdrawal last summer, they were using their satellites, training their satellites, and helping the US government. Because what they noticed was that all of a sudden, when the US was withdrawing and the Taliban was sweeping through, they noticed lots and lots of choke points they hadn't seen before on motorways, and queues of cars backed up and backed up and backed up. And when they looked closely, they realized that the Taliban had been setting up checkpoints. And obviously we now know that, but they didn't really know that at the time. So they were able to feed that information back to the US and feed it back to their partners on the ground in Afghanistan and say, look, we can't tell you what to do, but we are showing you these pictures. This is going to be a really hard place to pass. You're going to need to go somewhere else. And so I think the military actions are really important, and they do see as they're playing a humanitarian role. If any of this comes to war crime tribunals, if any of this comes to sort of fruition, not only are they making a difference at the moment, but they can make a difference in the future. And I think they see that sort of higher, bigger calling as something that's really important to them.
Thanks. That's fascinating stuff. And just one final one, if I may. So they're based in Colorado, I think. I saw that from your article. Great. So you're normally a kind of Washington rat, going around the corridors of power and all the rest of it. How was there a difference in view from the people you're speaking to out in the Midwest? Do they view the war very differently? Any kind of difference of opinion there?
I think not. I think in all seriousness, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone around here, even tuning into sort of quite right-wing people on the news in the evening. The general viewpoint here is that this is a terrible thing. The only slight movement, I think, which is more to the far right, is the US is giving a lot of money. There's no doubt about that. They're getting tens of billions of dollars. And with everything that's going on in the US at the moment, there's obviously huge national debates on things like abortion, on gun control, and education. Donald Trump, who is still a massive figure in the Republican Party, it was one of the first people to say, hang on a second, we're spending tens of billions of dollars over here in Ukraine, but what about people in our country? That's the only movement I've seen so far. And I think that as time goes on, the longer the conflict goes on, you will see more people question the amount of money being given when there are obviously, same as in the UK with the cost of living, the inflation over here is really high. Petrol prices are really high over here. So people are going to be starting to wonder, is there another use for this US taxpayer money? That's where I'd say the movement was. Otherwise, no, they deplore the invasion and Russia needs to be held accountable.
Thanks so much, Jamie. We've got one question that I wanted to move on to from a listener now. Do not hesitate to DM Dom or me, or email podcast@telegraph.co.uk with a question, because we do read them all and we do put them to our experts. So there's a question from Hina here that I think probably I'll direct towards you, Dom, which has asked for the latest update on the control of Snake Island. So Snake Island, that very important island that right at the beginning of the war became a kind of symbol of Ukrainian might after the soldiers stood up to a Russian warship. Dom, can you give us the latest update on the situation in Snake Island?
Yeah, of course, and thanks for the question. So a couple of weeks ago, in fact, probably a bit more than that, in my sort of final thoughts for the day, I kept saying, keep your eye on the northeast and the southwest. And the northeast was the Ukrainian counterattacks around Kyiv, and the southwest was what was happening on Snake Island. And so we did owe it to you to come back and report, and we've been keeping our eyes on that. So Snake Island is just a reminder, a very small little dot of rock in the northwest corner of the Black Sea, but it is critical for control of the water around there. From Russia's view, freedom of movement in the Black Sea and any potential amphibious landing in Odessa would be almost impossible if they didn't hold Snake Island. And for Ukraine, it's all of those things plus helping to get the grain out if and when we can with a maritime corridor. So a small piece of real estate, but hugely important to whoever holds it. The latest update we got was on Monday of this week, 2 days ago, from Britain's Defence Intelligence community, from the MOD here, and they said that it's disputed. It has been disputed that Snake Island over the last few months, well, from day one of this war, currently thought to be held in Russian hands, and Russia have been seen putting on SA-15s and SA-22 air defence systems onto the island. They are short and medium range air defence systems that would then put an umbrella over the top of the northwest part of the Black Sea. So if there are these SA-15s, SA-22s on the island, that is important for Russia. Since the Moskva, the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, was sunk, Russia's not wanted to put much of its Black Sea Fleet anywhere near the coast of Ukraine. And so if it wasn't able to put things on Snake Island, it would have to put those ships in harm's way. So by holding Snake Island and putting air defence assets on it, it means that they can keep the rest of their fleet in the comparative safety back towards the Sevastopol port in Crimea. Now, Ukraine have shown themselves very good at blowing stuff up on Snake Island. So keep your eye on there. Again, keep your eye on the southwest, because I wouldn't be surprised at all if Ukraine now have a go, and they used drones in the past to attack things on Snake Island. With the inflow of heavy artillery and these MLRS multiple launch rocket systems to the country, and they are probably in range. I think it's, 15 miles? Snake Island, I think it's 15 miles off the coast, which will be in range of MLRS. So very likely that it's about to get quite noisy there again. This, I'm sure, will go hand in hand with the debate about maritime corridors to get the grain out. But it's critical for Ukraine for the reasons I've said, to hold Snake Island, but also to draw the Black Sea Fleet out. When we talk sort of bigger picture about what's going to cause this war to end, Russia's lost now. I mentioned yesterday I had lunch with a very senior defence source, and he said that Russia's lost 25% of its ground forces, 25% of the entire Russian ground forces in this war. Not just the forces that went in, but 25% of the whole lot. I mean, that's colossal. But Russia has got a massive navy, a very good submarine fleet, a long-range hypersonic missiles, space systems, cyber. So there's lots of other things. Russia's still very powerful. But if you sink the Black Sea Fleet or render it inoperable by sinking 2 or 3 more ships, then I wonder if that would be the time when Putin says, enough's enough. We need to draw stumps here and start negotiating. So I think Snake Island will increase in importance. Not that it has never really been low down the list, but I think it will increase in importance over the next few weeks as the grain issue comes to a head, and as the heavy rocket systems go in to Ukraine. and thoughts of what will it take to push Putin on the back foot and make him sue for peace. When all these issues come to a head, I think those issues are going to come to a head in the near future.
Thanks so much, Dom. I think we're nearing towards the end of the time we have today, but I wanted to move to all three of you for your final thoughts. So, Nikki, I'm sure we'll talk to you again before your time in Ukraine comes to an end, but what would you like to leave our listeners with today of an idea of the situation in the capital?
So far, we've only been to Lviv and Kyiv. We're heading further east later this week. But I think, my first impressions of this country, I've just been so just blown away by how hardy the Ukrainians are, how they've adapted to such incredible tragedy, that both personal and just that has struck the country in general, and just how they're keeping positive, upbeat. They're really trying to kind of carry on as normally as possible, and how focused they are on countering this invasion, on countering this authoritarianism from Russia, not only for their own country, but people keep saying to me, this is important for the rest of Europe, for the rest of the world. We don't want to see Russia win, because then that's going to enable dictators and authoritarians around the world, and so they really have a huge sense of a higher purpose as to what their goal is. And just on the ground in Kyiv, it's such a beautiful, vibrant, creative city. And I said this earlier in the podcast, but I'm just so taken aback and impressed by how incredibly resilient people are. So that's what I'd like to leave you with.
Thanks, Nicola. And hear to that. In terms of you, Jamie Johnson, what are your final thoughts for the day, having seen so much amazing technology at Maxar and what they're doing to help?
I think actually it's worth making a point throwing it forwards. There's an interesting piece of intelligence that's emerged this morning that I'm going to start writing about after this, is that the US is saying it lacks a sort of clear picture of what Ukraine's sort of war strategy and intelligence is. And actually intelligence agencies seem to know far more about what Russia's military is doing, despite the fact that they are shipping sort of billions of dollars to weapons to the Ukrainians. Now, the Ukrainians have admitted that they're not actually telling America everything. They're keeping the intelligence, some of it to themselves, as countries do. But it'll be quite interesting to see how this relationship sort of plays out. Ukraine is obviously very keen to project itself, not just on the world stage, but also to its allies, saying, we are powerful, we are defending, we are going to keep fighting, we're going to do this. But eventually, as I went back to the money earlier, the flow is not endless. And so they don't seem to want to give an impression that they're sort of losing or that they're slowing down. Despite, as you say, as I think Nikki said earlier, the reports of 100 troops a day being killed. So it'll be an interesting one to watch. The idea that the US knows more about Russian military than they do about the Ukrainian military strategy, I think is quite interesting, and I think definitely one to watch going forwards.
Thanks, Jamie. And Dom Nicholls, to you for the final word.
Thanks, Sophie. I'll just draw people's attention to the way Russia's acting at the moment. Shown very, very difficult to get any military success on the battlefield, or very limited success at a very high cost. So just starting to escalate sideways. And what I mean by that is it's difficult to escalate up. We don't like Russia talking about nuclear weapons and constantly threatening nuclear weapons, but actually we kind of got over our shock. The first few weeks when it was referred to quite a lot, we've got over that initial shock, and actually we're now, I think Western leaders have realised that they've got decades of nuclear diplomacy upon which they can draw about how to handle these conversations and how to think of it as a subject. So the sort of nuclear escalation seems to have lost its power a little bit. So Russia's escalating sideways. The legal stuff that we said earlier on about these captured Brits, about whether they'll be used as a test case to try and discourage other people from joining the Ukrainian Foreign Legion, because Russia won't accept them as combatants. They will say that they are mercenaries and therefore they are subject to a long spell in prison or the death penalty. So I think they're going to try and escalate sideways through the legal. legal strand, and they're going to escalate sideways through sanctions. But at every opportunity through the politics, they're going to try and draw down these sanctions. Which again, the comments today from Turkey's foreign minister about Russia's legitimate demand and Russia's exports of Ukrainian grain. I think these are unhelpful comments. Russia will be delighted that these comments are being made, and they will look for every opportunity to push that line through the politics. So I think we're going to see, as the battle itself seems to be calcifying along a new line of control, then I think we'll see these other strands coming into play, and the Gerasimov doctrine, if you like, this so-called Russian ability to use power in all other spheres of human activity, not just the military sphere, for which they are vaunted as masters. We're going to see if it's, if they are as good in that area as they say they are.
Ukraine, the latest, is an original podcast from The Telegraph. To stay on top of all our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 30 days completely free at telegraph.co.uk/audio. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. each weekday on Twitter Spaces. Follow The Telegraph on Twitter so that you don't miss it. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave a review, as it helps others find the show. You can also get in touch directly with us by emailing podcasts@telegraph.co.uk. We do read every message. Ukraine the Latest is produced by Louisa Wells and Giles Gear, and today on Twitter, Jaden Irving.